Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our learning session. Today, we will be looking at developing a stable and experienced workforce. I am Jordan Binadel. I'm a senior consultant with Mutual Ventures. Mutual Ventures is a public sector consulting organization that has recently been commissioned by the Department for Education to do some analysis into the impact of delays in care proceedings on children's services. We are doing a number of learning events following the conclusion of that project to share some of our initial findings. And as mentioned, today we'll be looking at some of our findings relating to workforce. I am fortunate enough today to be joined by Vaynant MacDonald, who is the Principal Social Worker at the London Borough of Islington, and will be presenting some of what Islington's been doing to help build up a really stable and experienced workforce long term. So thank you all for joining us. As part of the program, we are delivering a number of these sessions as mentioned. So we've already delivered the first two, the first looking at effective pre-proceedings, the second utilising data to tackle delays in care proceedings. If you missed these sessions and you are interested in hearing more, I will be sharing the slides from today's session with you afterwards, and there is a link to the recording and the slides from those sessions embedded in this page. Similarly, if you would like to register yourself for our learning event next week, which is looking at fostering a one system mindset and culture, there is a registration link for that available. But today we are looking specifically at workforce, and so we will jump in. We're going to start off by providing some of the key insights and learnings that we gained over the course of the project, some specific things that we think local authorities and the judiciary could be doing to help improve workforce recruitment and retention, and some examples of good practice currently taking place. I'll also be providing an overview of some of the high-level findings from the Big Listen, which is a research piece that was recently run, and the findings have been released. And then, as I mentioned, we will be hearing from Vaynant around some of the things that Islington has been doing to really build up a stable workforce long term. We're going to be ending today's session with a Q&A at the end, so please do feel free to share any questions that you might have on the chat, and we will address as many as we can towards the end of the session. So just to start off by saying a really big thank you to those who participated in the project over the last several months. What we've really learned and some of the outcomes that we've gained from this project have really been dependent on the level of participation that we've had, and people have taken a lot of time to really share some of the amazing things that they've been doing to give us really insights into what's happening within their local authorities. And it's for that reason that we're really able to present some of these findings back to you today. So just to say a really big thank you. As I mentioned, this project was commissioned by the Department for Education, and the main purpose of this work was really to track the impact of delays in public law cases within the family justice system, and to try and quantify the knock-on effects on the care system at a local and national level, and to propose some system-wide approaches to tackling these delays. This involved a number of different elements, and that was first to develop and roll out a financial modelling tool to all the local authorities that allowed them to understand and quantify the financial impact based on their local authority specific data. We also engaged really widely across the system to ensure that we were developing realistic responses that were not only achievable but were really impactful. As I mentioned, we had a really high level of project engagement. We worked with over 100 local authorities, across the months of the project, directly with 6 judges, a number of CAFCAS managers, and we did 3 system level deep dives where we worked with a number of system partners to really gain a kind of deep understanding of what was going on in the system, how the partners engaged. I was involved in one, and I thought it was a really incredible insight into how things were working and what was really going well and where there was areas for some improvement. And then finally, and most importantly, we did some direct engagement with young people and families. If you would like to find out more about the project, there is a link to the web page, again, embedded in the slides with a password. We've got some initial findings from phase 1, more about the different tools that we used and some of the project context. So really encourage you to take a look there if you'd like to learn more. So just to set the scene a little bit about the kind of national context of this project, as you know, back in 2014, there was the statutory time limit around the duration of care proceedings that was introduced by the Children and Families Act, 26 weeks. And that was really trying to set a standard for how long care proceedings should be taking. Following that, the duration dropped down and at its lowest point was 27 weeks in 2016. So you can see kind of nationally across the board, it was really close to reaching where we were aiming for. However, unfortunately, since 2016, there has been an upward trend over time. And as of the third quarter of 22-23, the national average was hitting that 46-week mark. And at over 11 months, this is a really significant proportion of an infant or child's life, and is 26 weeks above the statutory limit. Just to kind of give you a bit more detail, back in 2021, only 23% of cases were disposed of within the 26-week target, which was an 8% decline compared to 2020. So really starting to see the kind of impact of COVID compounding on what was already an upward trend. But that is, of course, the national average. It's really important for you to have a kind of clear understanding of what's happening across the regions, to understand some of the underlying local and regional trends that make up the national average. So you can see here there's quite significant variance across the ADCS region, with the Northeast averaging around 31 weeks and Greater London up at 56. And I think this quite clearly shows the kind of reveals the inequalities that are sitting behind some of these numbers and the impact that judicial and local authority practice can have on the outcomes of children. As I mentioned, over the course of the project, we had a number of different types of engagement. And one of the things that was really clearly identified as being a kind of root cause for these delays was workforce challenges specifically. This is not going to be a surprise to anybody that there is an issue with nationally with social work workforce. It's something that was discussed, at quite a key level within the care review and a number of other areas as well. But from our direct engagement with local authorities, we identified some particular issues. The first really being a limited pool of experienced children's social workers. The actual number of people who were in the profession was really kind of nowhere near what the demand was for those experts. This was creating a lot of competition between local authorities and between local authorities and CAFCAS, who were trying to attract people from quite a small pool, and was leading to some practices around pricing and other ways to try and attract people. That was creating a lot of kind of competition and instability in the market. Simply by not having enough people in those roles, it meant that staff who were there were really operating beyond their capacity. They were dealing with really high caseloads. They were having to pick up cases halfway through care proceedings as colleagues were leaving. And this was really a result of high levels of staff turnover. This was then creating a further challenge of upskilling people within the market because there were quite a lot of people moving in and out of local authorities quite quickly, making kind of sustained training difficult. And this was really impacting not only the morale of the people who were staying in the profession, but also the quality of their work. Some of the people that we spoke to admitted that their social workers were really struggling to keep to court submission deadlines due to the sheer kind of volume that they were dealing with and having to request extensions. So it was really directly impacting the duration of proceedings and contributing to that upward trend that we spoke about. One of the other things that really was clear to me in a lot of the conversations that I had, particularly with frontline staff, was this sense of mistrust that they felt. In some sessions where we were talking to kind of core teams and social workers, people became quite emotional, really saying that the kind of scrutiny and kind of distrust that they felt from the system itself, as well as from the public. So in those frontline sessions, we asked people how would they describe the current system. Some people spoke about things that were kind of unrelated to workforce, but what came up kind of really often was this sense that people did not feel trusted, that they felt dismissed, that they felt it was an adversarial system, and that their professional opinion was not valued. In a space where people are working really hard to try and recruit people, and this is obviously quite a big issue. When they were asked what their aspirations for the system could be, it was really based on kind of strengthening relationships, less adversarial, really building that sense of trust and allowing social workers to feel that they are recognized as experts, treated as professionals, and as anyone working who has been trained extensively would expect. We also worked with the judiciary to help get some insights into what they felt were some of the issues around workforce. And so one of the things, I mean, this is a fairly high level thing and not going to be overly surprising, but recruitment and retention, they felt that local authorities and CAFCAS were having resourcing issues kind of continuously, that over time was really impacting how much time they could spend on a case, on a particular case, which was therefore leading to further delays. One of the other things that they felt is really that kind of linked to that trust, and that social workers needed to feel that they were empowered, that they had a sense of confidence going into the court arena, which at times could be really daunting, and not only in kind of being in that space, but that their assessments that they were putting forward were going to be accepted. And then finally linked to that, really thinking about the level of training that social workers had going into the court arena. Did they understand what was going to happen? Did they understand who was going to be in the courtroom with them? And I don't necessarily mean from a role perspective, but building those relationships with the judiciary, with the guardians, so that they're going into a space where they kind of feel comfortable and they're able to do their job to the kind of highest standard that they can. Some data really supported what we were saying, and I'll go through this fairly quickly, but we're looking at kind of average national vacancy rates, which are really high, average agency worker rates, again, really high, and a correlation, as you can see, between vacancy rates and the reliance on agency workers. And then looking at your average regional caseloads, which are all really, really high. And that's just really supporting what we were hearing firsthand. But it wasn't necessarily just capacity issues and were kind of resourcing issues within local authorities that was identified as an issue. 78% of local authorities that we spoke to cite core capacity as one of the key drivers of delays. It was actually the most commonly cited reason, people saying they were just really struggling to get, for example, final hearings in a reasonable deadline. And this was something that was supported by the judiciary themselves, with 5 out of 6 of the DFJs that we spoke to citing insufficient core capacity, either relating to availability of judges or just resources more generally, as really impacting the duration of care proceedings. So, having said all of that, and I appreciate that won't be new information to everyone, but what could local authorities be doing regarding specifically workforce to improve the length of care proceedings? And just to highlight that when we're going to speak through some of these proposed things that you could be doing, it's really focusing on the short to medium term. things that you could put in place quite quickly to address some of these issues, while also recognizing that a national strategy for workforce in the long term will be needed to kind of address those systemic issues around capacity. So the first is really thinking about joint non-compete agreements. And this is something that a lot of local areas already have in place, but could really be strengthened by adding additional benefits to ensure that these aren't necessarily used as workarounds. As I said, this is something that is already happening. So the London Pledge, which was launched in June 2022, so a year ago, is 32 local London local authorities who are working together collaboratively to avoid rising agency worker costs by agreeing regional pay rates. And this is really a focus on moving away from competitive behavior, working collaboratively to really kind of improve children's services within the region. And it's really advanced existing systems of engagement with the agency recruitment market, really bringing together a wide range of roles within the system to collaborate. And a really key part of its success has been the effective engagement and partnership with private sector partners, including managed service providers and social work agencies. And it's also kind of developing further to be a single platform where these local authorities can kind of highlight job vacancies and just creating a single place for potential social workers to look at. So as we mentioned, you know, there's these really fantastic initiatives in place working already. Some of the other things that local authorities could be doing is creating cross-system workforce academies, so a really joint approach to training for frontline staff at a regional level, and that's also thinking about CAFCAS and the judiciary, not just social work. This could create, you know, efficiencies in training, but also really encourage like relationship building, and also fostering stronger relationships and levels of trust across the system. And tied to that is thinking about establishing communities of practice. These could operate at a DFJ area level and really could be helpful to encourage stakeholders to share expertise, work together on solving common problems, and really just creating a sense of kind of community within social work practice. I've seen this in play in the Strengthening Families, Protecting Children program, which I work on. There are communities of practices across like a number of different local authorities, and some of the work that's coming out of there is really fantastic. It really empowers people to know that they have a platform where they can share their experiences and hear from others who are in similar positions. So what could the judiciary be doing to improve care proceedings? So thinking about alternative timetabling approaches. One of the things that could be done is ensuring that time is blocked out in judges' calendars so that the final hearing can be held within 26 weeks of the timeline. This is actually in place in Worcestershire DFJ area, which has the shortest average duration of cases nationally and is below the 26-week threshold. So it's really showing that that is an effective approach to help manage the duration. Tied to that is the reintroduction of court case progression managers. They would be in place to proactively troubleshoot the most delayed cases. And this was something that was highlighted by DFJs consistently as a prerequisite to support the implementation of alternative listing approaches. And finally, just really limiting assessments and oral evidence where appropriate. So thinking about when independent social work assessments are really needed. Is that information available to you in your existing assessments? And, you know, will it really be beneficial to add another external assessment? And also thinking about the time allocated to oral evidence. So those are the kind of key findings from our work across the project. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered, please do drop me an email. We're really keen to hear from you. But before I hand over to Venant, just to go through some really key and interesting insights from the London Innovation and Improvement Alliance on some of the workforce projects that they have been doing. We've been speaking to them about some really interesting things, and we wanted to share some early insights from one of the pieces of work that they have been involved in. And that is the Big Listen. So this is a research piece that has been carried out in collaboration, which is really exciting, by the London Innovation and Improvement Alliance in partnership with the South East Sector-Led Improvement Programme. And what it really is creating a chance for all social workers to be heard in order to help a regional response to improving a working environment. And this was done across 52 local authorities across London and the South East. They had an amazing level of engagement with over 1,000 responses and 150 social workers and managers that participated in a range of focus groups and events. And it was really about bringing a voice to local authorities, social workers, managers and students, sharing the research back with central government to help inform the response around the care review, and thinking about how local authorities can adjust their kind of approach to workforce to help really build up that stable and experienced workforce. So here are some of the key findings that we're really grateful that they've shared with us. I'm going to just pick out a few. The first, number one, looking at public perception of social work, and it's something that social workers are really struggling with. It's really adding a barrier to recruitment when people think they are not viewed as being trustworthy by the public. It's not viewed as a profession that's kind of positive as a result of some of the negative representations in media. So that's really something to think of. Equally, if you look at number 4, 35% of social workers who responded plan or considering a move to the agency market. So, you know, that kind of flow out of the permanent market, which we've seen. And that obviously is something that needs to be addressed, considering, you know, people are really working to try and keep people within the permanent market rather than moving out. And then finally, just looking at number 9, location is actually the main reason social workers choose the local authority that they work for, 58% responding, followed by specific roles available. So this is really helping local authorities, I think, review their local recruitment strategy and target areas with good transport links and routes to really try and attract people in. So I appreciate I've moved through that at quite some pace, but some really, really interesting findings coming out of that work. As I said, this was some initial early insights shared with us by Rula Tripolaki and Mark Evans, who have been leading this work together. So a big thank you to them for sharing that with us. If you have any questions about this work, I would really encourage you to speak to them. And I'm sure they will be happy to get back to you, and some more detail behind those findings will be coming out. So I am going to now hand over to Venant, and he will take us through some of the work that Islington has been doing. Again, just to remind everyone that we will be doing a Q&A at the end, so please do feel free to post any questions that you might have in the chat, and we will address that at the end. Venant?
Good morning, and thank you, Jordan. So as Jordan was saying in the introduction, I'm Venant MacDonald, the Principal Child and Family Social Worker in Islington, and I'm going to kick off by just saying a little bit about Islington. And I absolutely agree with that last point that Jordan made on the slide, is how important it is to think about a workforce coming from your local area, which is also one of the challenges that we face in building our workforce. So Islington is an inner London authority. It's highly populated. We have a surprising number of children for our size. So it is often thought of as a place of quite a bit of wealth, but also with stark levels of deprivation and differences between those who have incredible wealth and those who live a very different life and right next to each other as well is quite a key component of Islington life. So a third of our population is from the global majority, but it is interesting, I think, to note that we are one of the most deprived local authorities in London and even nationally. We have incredible high numbers of domestic violence and abuse, contextual safeguarding concerns, and of course, the usual type of concerns that social workers have to work with. So recruiting to Islington is complicated in that it is not a place generally where a newly qualified or even an experienced social worker can afford to live. So that is a key problem in our recruitment strategy, is just how expensive it is for a social worker to make a home and to live in the local authority where they are also working. So if we then look a little bit at some of our workforce data, and this is a repeat from the same data set that Jordan has showed earlier, and it shows Islington's vacancy rate. And I have to say that I'm not going to say anything today that is particularly groundbreaking. So, but thinking about our workforce, we can't in Islington help but to be very grateful for the position that we are in, comparatively speaking. Are we constantly looking for qualified social workers? Absolutely. Do we want more experienced social workers? Without a doubt. But if we compare ourselves to the national position, we also see that we are in a relatively good space. So the 2022 data that was taken in September last year shows our current vacancy rate at 11.4%, which compares really well with the England average or even the in and outer London average. So we do quite well. If we think about how our staff then move on and how they change over, again, Islington is not in a bad position at all. So we had a strange dip during the COVID period, but we now seem to be in line with data going back to 2018-19, where we have a turnover rate of about 12%, which is a really favorable comparison with our inner London and Greater London colleagues, and better than the English average as well. If we turn to our caseloads, for us, this is part of, I think, the picture that brings us success. We really strive to contain our caseloads as much as we can. And you can see we've had some variation, but not a huge amount, slightly up from last year. And we think this is a bit of a pressure that we are currently experiencing, but we do quite well. Inner authorities have brought their caseloads down, so we compare quite well with them, still doing better than Greater London and certainly quite a bit better than the English average. But we know from our workforce conversations that this is a very important point for our social workers. And one of the things that we often hear in our recruitment strategies, and when I looked around at recruitment strategies across England and Greater London, one of the things I've noticed is that almost every local authority say in their recruitment and retention strategies that they have low caseloads. And when I speak to social workers about this, they say, we're not fooled by that. We go and have a look. This data is published. We know what caseloads in local authorities are. We speak to colleagues in those local authorities and we know it's not low. So they're not fooled by those strategies. So for me, this is an important takeaway. If you want your caseloads to be an attractive factor, it really does need to be an attractive caseload option, or social workers will know better. So, but it's very hard to keep it that way. So what do we do in Islington? Very quickly, I'm going to go through a few things, and this is not groundbreaking in any particular way, but social workers tell us that they come to Islington because we have a mature practice model that is well understood and that they would like to work in. So the practice model is fairly well written about in Islington, but they say, this is the way I want to practice. you are strong on relationship-based work, and that's what I want to do. That's why I trained to be a social worker. I don't want to be a case manager. There are some authorities where that is something I can do, but that's not what I'm in the job for. So we push our practice model quite strongly during our recruitment process, and it's actually a key part of our recruitment process as well. According to our practice model, we also use data in a particular way. Not only do we not collect data unless we really, really have to, but we constantly use our data to hypothesize about practice. And we really try, and as a senior leadership team, not to use data as a means to put pressure on our staff and say, why is this not happening? Why did that not happen? Why is this out of time scale? We try to understand with our practitioners why the data is what it is like, and what does that mean for practice? What can we learn from this? How could we improve this? If something is a day out of time scale, but it happened the next day, how serious is that really? So because we know that using data as a blame game is really demotivating for our practitioners. So we also make sure that our senior leaders have a good understanding of what practice feels like. So twice a year, at least, the senior leadership group goes back to practice. We go out with our colleagues. We go into family homes. We attend meetings. We go to supervision. We observe practice at every opportunity that we can. So we call that practice week. And I know we're not alone in doing this, but it is a very important thermometer for us about how our practice is going, and also what the fidelity of our practice model is like at the front line. So observations is a key part of our practice model. But also we do things like last year we carried out the SOAR, the Social Work Organizational Diagnostic, so to help us understand our workforce better and see where their pressures are, what are the strengths, so what makes Islington a safe place to work. So one of the things I really heard in the presentation that Jordan did was about mistrust and distrust. We don't want the place of work to be a place where you feel mistrusted or distrusted as a practitioner. We really want our practitioners to have a voice in our organization. It's an easy thing to say, and I'm sure we don't always succeed, but it is something that we take seriously. One of the things that support our practitioners is to have specialisms in particular areas, such as domestic violence and abuse, exploitation, and mental health. These are the conundrums our staff work with that sometimes they find very difficult to manage. And they appreciate the help and support from colleagues who specialize in those areas, who could be coaching them, who could propose ways that they could maybe approach a difficult problem and so forth. So we know that's a really valued part of our service. So then looking at our next slide, supervision and group supervision. Again, that is something that the big lesson heard as well. If social workers don't feel supported through supervision, then they may consider moving on. So we think of supervision and monitoring and making sure that it is a good quality, that's a very strong feature in retaining our staff. So it is one of the things that we feel that we have control over. So next in line, of course, is we are an outstanding authority. And I don't say that to sound glib or self-righteous. We work incredibly hard to be an outstanding authority. And it is incredibly pressuring on senior leaders to remain an outstanding authority. And we hope that we will remain. But I can't not acknowledge that this is something that almost every applicant mentions in their application. Why do you want to work in Islington? Because you are an outstanding authority. So, and your practice model. We also have clinical support through CAMS for our teams. So from clinicians, more and more our practitioners work with parental mental health. As the waiting times for families to meet a clinician increase all the time, it means more pressure on our practitioners. And that really worries me as a principal social worker, is how much responsibility social workers have around mental health in relation to their young people and even the adults in the family. So to have clinicians to speak to about how can we support a family with these kind of mental health concerns while they wait to be seen by clinicians, I think is really important. I can't stress enough the importance of high quality training and development that supports our practice model, that supports career development of our staff. And we have a trauma-informed approach as part of our motivational practice model. And that's not only about how our practitioners approach children and families, but it's also about how we approach our staff in recognizing the trauma that the job may entail. So the next slide for me. Okay, so briefly, these are some of the things then that we consider as part of recruitment and retention. Our leader is constantly providing us with leadership, strong leadership around recruitment and retention, and especially around creating a diverse workforce. So we know that's important for our workforce, is that they can see themselves reflected in our workforce at every level. So that is something that we've really been developing in the last couple of years. We unashamedly recruit to our values, standards, and our culture of our practice model. In the beginning, that meant that we lost some practitioners who had to say that this is not for me. But we are now in a mature process, and it really makes a difference for us because it means that practitioners are not surprised by the practice that we expect from them. Social work training in all forms, step up to social work, frontline, every way that we can train a social worker, we support. So it keeps our talent line active, and we recruit actively into our newly qualified social work workforce. So we absolutely invest in the ASYE programs. We try to provide developmental opportunities such as practice education for our staff who become more experienced, and they really appreciate that. And an often overlooked area for social workers is that we have good early help services. They see the value of that as a social worker in practice more generally. So they know that if they are going to propose that we close a case or that the lead professional moves to a non-statutory practitioner, that they can have some peace of mind about who's going to support that family. Caseloads I've already mentioned, so I'm not going to say more about that. And it would be wrong not to mention the London Pledge, which I'm not going to go into detail because Jordan has already said something about that. We do have our challenges, and I'm going to finish on these challenges. So career progression for us is a difficult area because we know that we have a very stable management team, and that sometimes means that social workers need to go somewhere else in order to become more senior managers. That is something that we try to resolve. The cost of living crisis is eroding our reward system for our social work staff. It also is starting to impact, I can see, on the student talent pipeline, with this year fewer student intakes at universities. And that worries me about what's that going to mean in 2 or 3 years' time, as students can't afford to become social workers. And then there is vicarious trauma, which is something that staff talk to them about all the time. The difficulties they experience at work, the incredible complexity they have to work with, the scary and frightening, upsetting things that they have to manage is something that we need to continue to think about. So these are the things that is on my mind as a principal social worker all the time. So not many answers, I'm afraid, but maybe just a brief snapshot of what it is that we do in Islington. And that is also the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vainan. We really appreciate that and some really interesting insight, I think. We have a couple of questions from the audience, so thank you to everybody who is posting questions. A reminder, we'll be taking a few, so please do let us know if you have any. Vainan, the first one is actually for you. So what the audience would like to know is really around caseload balance when thinking about complex cases. So if you kind of have an average of 16 cases, across Islington, if 5 of them are incredibly complex, it can feel like a lot more. So how does the balance of case complexity work when you are thinking about your social workers' capacity?
Our average caseloads and individual caseloads are not the same. So we do make provision for it. So we have a system, a caseload weighting system that we employ that take into consideration whether your cases are in court, for instance, or whether there's particularly challenging casework issues. So, and that would mean a smaller caseload. So the average caseload might be 13 or 14, but there are some of our practitioners, like some of our senior social workers, who have a much smaller caseload because they deal with much higher complexity. So we really try to have that kind of intelligent approach to caseload management. It's really hard sometimes. It really is very hard and takes a lot of discipline. And it causes a lot of difficulty for our allocating managers to allocate cases. I can't say that it's not true. And I can't say that we 100% of the time are always able to stick to that. But we really try to.
Fantastic, thank you. Just off the back of that, how does that work in terms of the kind of, you spoke about one of the challenges being the trauma that your social workers experience, kind of having this prolonged exposure to really kind of complex and challenging situations. How does that work in terms of kind of caseload allocation and even more than that, support for the social workers that are going through that?
Well, it can be very variable. I mean, so we've had cases of situations where some of our staff had to take time away from work. So because that is what was required. But often what our staff value is group supervision and in reflective individual supervision on their cases. We also sometimes connect our staff to clinicians who provide some supervision around some of these issues to talk about what they have experienced and so forth. And we try to be very aware of what it is that our social workers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I came to work this morning and the first thing managers told me is, this happened last night. So before I logged on, I made it my mission to connect with that social worker and understand what happened with them. And sometimes that's what it takes, is that immediate sense of responding to what our practitioners are experiencing. And because they really find that supportive. But sometimes we do need to refer our social workers to our EAP, other clinicians, or make specific plans to support social workers, depending on what they've experienced.
Fantastic. Wynand, you mentioned concerns around the number of new social workers coming through, kind of partly an impact of the cost of living, potentially, you know, as we discussed that some of the findings coming out of Big Listen around the view of social workers with the public and the media. What do you think local authorities can do to kind of help address that early on and really encourage people into the profession of social work?
We've asked our partners who like in Step Up to Social Work, Frontline, universities and so forth to really work with us about recruiting locally. So because we know recruiting people with local roots who have their support systems here, their families and so forth, they are practitioners who make a better career in Islington. So we didn't always have this right. So sometimes we inherited students or prospective practitioners who had to travel across London to get to us, to do all sorts of things that added to their cost, and they never quite remained in Islington. So the closer we could get them to Islington, I think the better. So a lot of our strategies are aimed at our local communities. So for instance, when in our latest cohort for Step Up to Social Work, we actively advertise locally for people who would like to become a social worker. We work incredibly hard at recruiting through programs like Step Up to Social Work. And that's an example that I will use that we've had great success with. So better on average retention for those colleagues, better on average success in retaining that staff. So if they are with us, from the moment they start with us as a student, we think about them as someone that we want to employ by the end of it. So we don't think of a learner as just someone who's coming to do practice with us. We think them from that moment on, we think, how are we going to retain you? Are you going to be the social worker that can work, that's happy to work in our system, in our culture, in the way that we work? So we start those conversations and we make it quite clear that we would like you to work for us. So.
Fantastic. I like the idea of kind of thinking about the support system for social workers outside of work as well, and the importance of kind of thinking about that in terms of recruitment strategy. And I think that was also again highlighted in some of the outcomes from the big listen around location really being a key factor at what people are looking for, and trying to understand that and work with that. And I think that's also why regional kind of cross-system approaches to workforce are really, really key. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Just a reminder to everyone, if you would like to hear more about the project Mutual Ventures did, there is a web page on Mutual Ventures website. I will be sharing the link for that web page as part of the slide deck. So there's a link in that slide deck, so please go there, or you can just go directly to the Mutual Ventures website to hear a bit more. We'll have some project findings in there as well. I think we have time for a final question. So Vaynant, I just want to kind of pose this question to you, and it's what your views are on how to address the competitive culture moving to the highest bidder. So as we spoke about, that kind of high level of competition for quite a limited pool of experienced staff, and really what you think the role that the London Pledge has played in trying to address that.
Well, the London Pledge, I think, has certainly made a difference, or it's starting to make a difference. So, but that does not remove, I think, the difficult job for us to make us the most attractive place where someone would like to work. So the conversations I have with staff all the time, yes, money is at the forefront of their thinking, particularly with the cost of living crisis, but it's not the only thing that our social workers are worried about. They are worried about their personal reputation. They are worried about how they would be exposed and where they practice. And they do realize that the best pay does not always mean the best place to practice. And so many have no choice but to be attracted by the highest bid and the highest salary. And that is maybe how their circumstances are, but not everyone is. And that is something that's a challenge that we would want to meet. So that's why I think when we recruit colleagues and we interview them and we say, why did you apply in Islington? They always say the same thing. So you have a good reputation. We think it's a safe place to practice. We hear good things about your managers, your staff get supervision. So we like your practice model. We like the way that your culture works. You're a diverse community. Those are the things I hear as well. And I know we're not the best payer in the field either. So about pledges, I think they work, but I do worry that they may ultimately limit our supply, because as we control the market from a macroeconomic level, and I'm not an economist, but as we control the market, it means that some people will then have no choice but not to become a social worker or to leave social work, because they just simply cannot work for that under those controlled circumstances. It does not pay enough, so they leave social work. And we know that this is a reality. A record number of practitioners have left social work altogether. And I can't help but worry that things like controlling the market must contribute to that. So ultimately, we may pay the price for it.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's a really key point around the complexity of actually what's going on. One of the things I think was really clear to me over the course of this project, and this is thinking kind of bigger than just workforce when we were looking at some of the other really key factors that was contributing to delays, when you're analyzing it against some of the national data or the regional data, you're not always getting a clear picture. And I think what that really speaks to is the level of complexity in a system that hasn't been working as it should for a very long time. And we're starting to see, you know, really kind of the impact of that in terms of workforce, in terms of duration, and a number of kind of other elements. But it's an incredibly complex system. And I think workforce in and of itself can't be fixed in isolation, can't be fixed in a silo. And so some of the things that we've spoken today about, particular practices that local authorities and the judiciary can put in place, some of the practices you've spoken about that Islington has, is really important. And it's kind of first steps for the short to medium term, but there is a wider strategy that's really needed to kind of address what's happening in the system. And I think that's kind of clearly highlighted in what we've spoken about today.
I absolutely agree, because one of the areas that I think we're very interested in, we're speaking to our local Safeguarding Children partnership about our practice model, because we think that if we think about this concept of trust and mistrust, we want our practitioners to be trusted by other practitioners in our system, health visitors, school nurses, head teachers, and so forth. So we try to use our practice model as a way of encouraging our staff to think about professional relationships in the same way that they think about the relationship with a young person or a family. So to make it a supportive relationship, to be aware of that relationship, to invest in that relationship, because that will be the vehicle of change. Because if you already feel under the cosh and you don't feel you're particularly well paid and the court doesn't appreciate you, but you experience that at every interaction level professionally, then your job becomes quite a miserable place to think about. So those are some of the things that I think there's scope to think about more.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's one of the things that really shone for me in this project was the level of kind of trust and support that social workers really need from across the system, from the kind of public, media, courts, and their own teams. And it sounds like it's something that Islington is really starting to get right. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing. And thank you to everyone who joined and submitted questions. We really appreciate it. Again, we'll be sharing the slides, so you'll have access to all of that, which will include a link for registration in next week's event, looking at culture, as well as a link to the website. So thank you to everyone. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and keep an eye out for next week's webinar. Thanks all.